Thank you, everyone who has joined the webinar. I know that some attendees, of course, will be coming in during the day's session, but as the clock has already struck 3 p.m. Central European time, then we'll try and get things running as we have a jam-packed day with great content to be able to help you all have 7 simple hacks to boost supplier engagement, and more so turning your suppliers into partners. My name is Sam Jenks. I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Kodiak Hub, and I will be your host for today's webinar. In addition, I am joined by my co-host, as I often am, the office dog, Charlie. So if you hear a bark in the background, then it's probably just Charlie adding his opinion to the day's content, and he can be rather opinionated. I'm also joined, and I apologize, I don't have a picture for you, by my colleague, Richard. Richard will be working the magic behind the scenes and will be casting out some polls to the group today during the day's session. So keep those fingers ready to vote. Short about us, for those who don't know anything about Kodiak Hub, Kodiak Hub is a supplier relationship management solution. We are a suite helping procurement and sourcing professionals just like you to build smarter and more sustainable supplier relationships with the help of deeper insights in the form of ratings and analytics. We provide an ecosystem of modules and applications that help our customers to pretty much plug and play managing supplier information, risk, compliance, performance, and collaboration all from one place. During the course of today's webinar, especially for those of you that can stick around for the product demonstration, we will, of course, become a lot more acquainted with Kodiak Hub solution and better understand how solutions like Kodiak Hub and modern SRM solution can help you guys to enhance supplier engagement in your broader supply chain. So on to the day's webinar agenda. We are in the midst of the introduction. After this session, we will then jump into a session that I like to call the Epiphany, understanding a little bit more about the importance of supplier engagement. Moving into a section that I like to call trust, which has, in my opinion, in our opinion at Kodiak Hub, become one of your most valuable currencies in the procurement, sourcing, and supply chain organization. Then we'll get into the meat and potatoes, the main event, the 7 simple hacks to boost supplier engagement, followed by a product demonstration of the Kodiak Hub solution to display, of course, how modern SRM solutions can boost supplier engagement. And we'll then land finally in a Q&A session. The Q&A, like I said, if you have questions during the day's content, make sure to simply write them in the chat bubble, and we'll get around to those questions at the end of the session after the product demonstration. I'm going to start today's webinar with a short story, if that's okay with everybody in attendance, which I've chosen to call the Epiphany. Really understanding the importance of supplier management. I was responding the other day to a tender, and my company was responding to an RFP that was related to supplier relationship management solution. And the project manager within that organization was very responsive, and she also then thanked me for my responsiveness during the tender process. I laughed, and of course I said, well, it's my job to be responsive and engaging, right? I mean, I'm a business development manager at a technology vendor. I've learned that responsiveness, right, and engagement in any evaluation process is super duper important. I mean, we talk about it all the time at Kodiak Hub. A prospective customer, of course, with us as a prospective supplier, should feel the same level of engagement from our team during the entire relationship lifecycle. The target for our collaboration is that they feel the same engagement from first touch in marketing to sales to contracting to after sales and delivery, and then also beyond, right? The project manager then kind of cracked a smile and had a little bit of a less enthusiastic look on her face. And she said to me, "You'd be surprised how little some suppliers care to engage and respond." And it hit me directly then, once we hopped off the call, that some buyers and suppliers have relationships where one party or both party genuinely believe that the other party doesn't care about the business relationship. It's kind of sad, no? I mean, as a provider of SRM solutions, Kodiak Hub's entire technology and platform is aimed at helping buyers and suppliers to transform their relationships in the way that they do business. We ensure, right, that there's a mutual place to be able to collaborate, report, share data, insights, and so much more. Our entire business model is built on the hypothesis that buyers and suppliers do care and that there is value to be extracted from that relationship and mutual gain to be seen from enhanced supplier engagement. We also all know, though, it takes two to tango. It takes two to trade, and it takes two to be engaging. At the same time, it only needs one to make things a rather frustrating partnership between a buyer and supplier. So what we're here to try and do today is to put a stop to failed buyer to supplier relationships, to unengaging buyer to supplier relationships. As we know, though, this is easier said than done. We're in a post-COVID world where the status of geopolitics and price inflation hasn't really made your life any easier. It hasn't made supplier engagement any easier. We look at this statistic from a recent CPO survey, and we see that 66% of respondents to the 2022 CPO Compass survey by procurement leaders said that they expect supply chain volatility in 2022. And with this, I would like to pause for our first poll. We're curious here. Are you currently experiencing supply chain volatility? Would you say that you are currently experiencing supply chain volatility? I'll stop sharing my screen to be able to then also take a moment to look at the poll results here in the chat bubble. Vote now. Are you yourself experiencing supply chain volatility? 66% said in that survey in 2022, which of course is data from 2021, that they were expecting volatility in 2022. Were they correct? The responses have been rolling in here. There's about 20 people that have responded, and you guys can all see 85% of attendees today then have said yes, whereas 15% have said no. Some more rolling in, and it's continuing to stay around the same line. So it's pretty obvious that volatility is no longer really a question of if or when. It's more so here and now. Put very poignantly, I think, by a procurement director in the infrastructure business, we're moving away from focusing on probabilities to focusing on possibilities. So what exactly are the possibilities? I think that that's the big question we need to ask ourselves. Well, to combat volatility and increase agility, there's a plethora of actions that are being taken by procurement leaders. As seen in this graphic from the 2022 CPO Compass survey, some of the top activities to combat and manage volatility are seen here, including supplier risk mitigation, greater due diligence, finding alternative supply sources, localizing supply chains, and so much more. Here you might notice a bit of a theme within these different activities. All of the actions require closer and more collaborative supplier relationships. We believe that supplier engagement, transparency, and trust with this in this volatile and complex world is going to become your most valuable currency. You need to lean on your supplier relationships now more than ever before. What we see here also is, of course, that there is a need to better have frameworks for supplier engagement, to better understand how can you start to build upon your supplier engagement program. And inspired by a 2017 article from ProForest, we have then listed the 5 key components here to building a supplier engagement program. Starting with number 1, building traceability and tier mapping, understanding really where and who you buy from. Moving on to step number 2, assessing the risk within your supply chain, gauging risks related to industry, category, strategic importance, size, context, you know the rest, right? This should be supported by enhanced due diligence of the supplier base, as well as then third-party intelligence, and then trying to figure out some way to benchmark those risks. Step 3 is then reviewing and prioritizing. Where are the risks? Putting your assessments to work, strategically mapping where supply chain risks are located, and then you can be able to, of course, address them by allocating the right resources. Step 4 is planning, acting, intervening, implementing corrective and development actions, of course, to target specific suppliers that might need that extra kind of tender loving care from your team. And the last step is better transparency between you and your suppliers. And these are the 5 key components to ensure engagement. When it comes to transparency, the best way to build that transparency is to build an objective truth. And what do we mean by that? Well, the best way that is done is to have an underlying set of KPIs that are agreed upon with the suppliers, reviewed, of course, at regular intervals by your team in order to track progress, built, of course, with some type of realistic goals and relativity to the supplier or the category that you're addressing as some underlying principles. I think it was really well put by a procurement leader's report recently that I saw, pulling out this particular quote. Procurement is in transition, and your value proposition is in transition. Procurement's enhanced value proposition is built from enhanced supplier partnerships. Leading teams are fostering the culture of developing collaborative relationships that more deliver upon things more than just cost savings alone. Procurement isn't just about, the bottom line anymore. You guys are being leaned on to drive top line value. Trust and engagement need to be one of your greatest currencies. And with that said, I think that we're ready now to dive into the meat and potatoes of today's session. Our 7 simple hacks to boost supplier engagement, which is, of course, hopefully going to turn your suppliers into partners. As a bit of a prerequisite for enhancing supplier engagement, it's important that your procurement organization is ready to harness and manage change. We believe that, culture and technology shifts will be 2 of your great catalysts for boosting supplier engagement. So to clarify our 7 simple hacks to boost supplier engagement, we've broken down our list of hacks into 2 categories: culture and technology. Starting with number 1 on our list of hacks, adopting a partner approach. Suppliers are your friends, they're not food, right? Vendors are partners and not just a means of supplies. To secure attention in a favorable and challenging economic world, when conditions are tough, when the going gets hard, right? Your organization should establish collaborative and mutually productive relationships and partnerships with your suppliers. Though procurement and sourcing have the pleasure of being the selective party in a buyer to supplier relationship, suppliers can really be selective as well, right? They can choose their customers and how engaged they want to be in the relationship. And it's best that we don't forget that. Sharing the burden and successes with our partnership approach is an awesome way to ensure supplier engagement. And that's why it's definitely our first hack on our list. Moving on to number 2, a culture shift that you guys might need to have in your team is within negotiations. Stop beating each other down. As mentioned earlier in this webinar, a buyer to supplier relationship begins long before the kind of trading of goods and services for payment. Make sure that you're putting your best foot forward during pre-sales, sales, and most importantly, negotiation, right? And engagement can really be greatly impacted by beating down one another in a negotiation. This world is evolving. Procurement's role is evolving. Buyer to supplier relationships are evolving. And so should the way that we negotiate and contract, right? We're entering into a new age where negotiations and agreements are moving really from what's in it for me and my company to what's in it for we and our companies. I mean, and this mindset and this culture shift will really help your team to create more engaging supplier relationships where not cost savings is the value, but holistic shared value is the target, right? Going into number 3 on our list of hacks, communicate the purpose and also of course, align on that purpose, but it's also important that you contract to make sure that there is it's a set of kind of rules in place, right? Supplier engagement serves a greater purpose than just governance or risk or performance management. Of course, it does those things as well, but supplier engagement is one of those key components to create shared value and also to ensure responsible business practices in supply chains at scale. It's important that you communicate to your suppliers that if they don't understand the importance of the supply chain development and impact, I mean, really, is that the type of supplier you want to be working with? So reevaluate the importance of those suppliers. Communication and creating a buy-in from suppliers is key, but to ensure also that you have safeguards in place, we would suggest that if you do not already have so today and you're not doing so today, that you begin to align a bit more within your contracts upon the type of engagement and compliance activities that suppliers will be subject to during the course of your collaboration, right? Having that clarity, the ownership or the responsibility, as well as then the trust, this all starts with better lines of communication, but also better scoping within your agreements as well. Moving on to number 4 on our list. And this is one that we believe heavily in. It's a culture shift that I think a lot of companies have adopted during the last few years. But if you haven't, then we urge you to do so, which is embracing supplier-enabled innovation. There is a statistic that I always lean back on. It's by Institute for Supply Management. This is that 65% of innovations are supplier and partner led, according to this study that they did in 2017. Remember, your suppliers are experts in their field, right? I mean, that's why they started working. You started working with them in the first place. I mean, inviting and expecting that their expertise and innovation should be a mechanism, built into your partnership agreements. This can be something as free form as just capturing stakeholder feedback during performance reviews, or something as formal, right, as like shared investments in R&D projects. If it's supplier engagement that you're looking for, I think that starting relationships by having big ears and generous pockets is a pretty good way of ensuring that there's going to be engagement on both sides of the table. So we actually want to stop here and pause for a poll to be able to talk a little bit about the topic of supplier innovation, and ask the question here, if you don't mind issuing this, Rich. Are you currently evaluating supplier innovation capacity? And if so, is it a key performance indicator that you're looking into? Stop sharing the screen here to see how we vote on this particular poll. Are you currently evaluating innovation as a key performance indicator within your supplier management? Not everybody has voted yet, but it seems as if it's rather overwhelming response. No is the response. 75% saying no, 25% or so saying yes to that particular aspect. And we can, of course, talk a little bit about how we can be able to start working innovation and the capacity for innovation into your supplier management, which, of course, gives you the backbone to put that trust in suppliers and enable supplier-led innovation as well. Get back to sharing my screen here. Moving into number 5. Hack number 5 on our list is going to be the first for technology, which isn't very odd. It's about improving the supplier user interface and their user experience. And this should come along with, kind of an inherent adoption of technology for supplier management, right? I mean, as we often say at Kodiak Hub, you don't get a second chance to make your first impressions, right? I mean, you have to create an immersive experience for your suppliers, and doing so with self-service responses are best managed through solutions that are going to give them an easy-to-use interface and easy to understand and intuitive interface. And I mean, what's the alternative to this, right? We talk about it all the time. Well, as I'm sure that some of you might be working today, and it's no shame in this, the alternative is spreadsheets, right? But I can tell you as a vendor ourselves who are receiving spreadsheets and tenders and in risk assessments and in IT or InfoSec assessments and alike, we're getting too old for this sheet. This is yesterday's way of working. You guys are ready for the future, and we're going to show you a little bit of how you can be able to get out of your spreadsheets, that Excel hell as we talk about, and get into a more dynamic solution. I want to stop for a poll here and just ask quickly to everyone in attendance, and don't be afraid, it is anonymous. Are you still using spreadsheets and mail to assess suppliers? The response values that you can vote on is yes or no, you have a homegrown solution, or no, that you're using a third-party software like Kodiak Hub to be able to address these particular questions. Doesn't seem like everybody has responded, but it seems pretty overwhelming as to those that have responded. About 85% have said yes. Those that have not said yes are using a homegrown solution. It doesn't seem like very many at all. No one in attendance is using a third-party software. So looking forward to getting into the demonstration in just a moment then. Getting back to the presentation here, if your SRM strategy really truly plans to put the buyer to supplier relationship and the engagement under the lens, then of course it's important that you guys have an experience that is some type of ease of use for the supplier. And SRM software, of course, offers this to address the supplier user experience. Looking at, of course, this, it needs to be just as good as your buyer user experience. I mean, if the supplier perceives that you are a customer that's easy to work with, then the chances are that they're going to engage and collaborate in your relationship with a smile on their face, right? As a procurement organization, often your success is going to depend on this, right? The willingness of your supplier to collaborate, report, and also lean into the collaboration. So make sure that you're addressing these aspects. Hack number 6, and this can also be brought to you by technology improvements, which is really removing the barrier for response. I mean, giving your supplier a better user experience for onboarding, risk assessment, performance evaluations, and alike. I mean, this is hopefully going to remove some of the friction and also improve your overall supplier engagement and response levels. But we wanted to offer up some small hacks that you can use as well to leverage modern SRM tooling, or like maybe just leverage the tools that you have today as well to further remove some of the barriers to enhance supplier engagement and also supplier response values. That first one is kind of password protection. I mean, remove the hassle that comes along with logins and the I forgot your passwords, right? Kodiak Hub solution functions through smart links with suppliers accessed via emails to remove any type of login barriers, making engagement from the supplier base one click away, right? Both within assessments, but in the collaboration space and alike. Autosave, this is a big one, and most solutions have this that are modern solutions. Suppliers work hard to engage, right? The last thing that you want for them is to have all their hard work being lost. Autosave functionality will, of course, ensure that your suppliers can always pick up wherever they have left off with not having to worry about hitting save, right? Sharing, it should be easy within the team. I mean, this is done in our solution by smart links that can be distributed amongst the team. Make sure that things are relevant to the supplier you're sending out to. It's nothing worse than getting an assessment or an action that's completely irrelevant for the industry you're in or alike. So make sure that you're keeping things relevant and aren't using misguided questions or activities. And the last element is then, of course, provide more clarity. Our solution does this in various ways. For example, like kind of the clear structure of moving along from section to section, or the status bar. I mean, it's important that you're leveraging technology to give your suppliers, right, a better orientation in the solution that you're utilizing, so that they're going to want to engage more and more, right? I think that's something that's also interesting here is leveraging better solutions helps you to better understand the overall response values of your suppliers. And with that, then we want to also then pause for yet another poll here very quickly to just ask are you currently measuring response rates from your suppliers to know if they're getting better or getting worse? And this, of course, is kind of a prerequisite to knowing if your suppliers are engaging or not. Are your suppliers getting better or getting worse? Do you have the means to be able to measure response from your suppliers? Overwhelmingly see already the response values about 75% on no, a little bit more, almost 80% on no, 20% on yes. All right. And we, of course, have some work to do here. The last element, and this is one of those hacks that you guys can really leverage, not necessarily needing a modern solution like Kodiak Hub. I mean, it's easier within it, but it's really a simple tool to be able to boost your supplier engagement, and it's to make sure that you're utilizing your brand value and also language, right? Creating more engaging copy when you're reaching out to suppliers. And you don't need to be a master marketer to write good copy, right? But you do need to be conscious that supplier engagement is really essentially marketing to your existing partners. I mean, just like marketers want to sell their products, you need to sell the importance of activities that you're doing to engage with your suppliers, right? I mean, small tweaks can be made to make some really substantial impact. And these are some of the 5 big tips that we have to be able to hack your supplier engagement within brand and the language that you're using. I mean, starting with the subject lines or your call to actions, however really you're reaching out to the suppliers, right? Make sure that these are engaging. Keep it short, grab their attention, tell them what's inside. Make sure that it's timely, right? You're not sending it in the middle of the night for suppliers, that you're sending it at the right time of day. Use action verbs. Make sure that they're also creating a sense of importance. Step 2 is create copy that sticks. And this is, the principles of good copy is always right, that it establishes trust, authority, builds relationships, and it gets people talking, sharing, or buying, as well as that it's emotional in some way. So make sure that you're creating copy with those principles. Also, try to personalize your emails or your outreach, right? Utilizing technology like Kodiak Hub, of course, then you can have like placeholder tokens, right, to remain familiar. So it'll be able to directly place in for a huge list of suppliers, their contact names or their company names to build a more personalized rapport. And we'll show that in the solution in just a moment. Also, throw around your logo value, right? You guys do this all too little, we feel, so make sure that you're throwing around that weight of that logo, making sure that it's also then creating a sense of urgency and trust with the supplier. They want to keep you as a customer, The last element then is trying to use language changes and adjustments. Work with, maybe utilizing request for solution or partnership instead of something like a proposal or quote, right? And in the spirit here of not just talking about it, but also then being about it, we're going to move on to a demonstration of the Kodiak Hub solution. So we wanted to just summarize with this slide to give everybody a last look at our 7 simple hacks. And we're going to now transition over to a demonstration of the solution. But before we do, we had one poll that we wanted to ask to everyone as I switch over my screen and show some practical examples within Kodiak Hub. Would you be interested in receiving a demonstration of Kodiak Hub after this webinar at some time? If so, please respond now in the chat bubble. We'll make sure to reach out to you afterwards. So you can expect to have somebody from our team be getting in touch with you after the session today. Just to give a little feel for the Kodiak Hub solution and also how, SRM technology can, again, be leveraged to better engage with your suppliers and boost engagement with your suppliers. We're going to show a few of these small tips and tricks that we have shared, some of these hacks in our solution now. We're going to spend about 10 minutes demoing in the solution. I know that we are close to being directly on time for the 45-minute slot, so we'll try and hold that time as well here. Jumping into the solution, we're able to see our suppliers plotted around the globe, and subject to the way that we want to kind of filter up and down the suppliers, we can be able to look at different groupings as we'd like to. Data properties can be managed to help you quickly locate suppliers in different groupings based upon their category or their segmentation, whatever that might be of your supplier base. Jumping into the supplier list overview, we're going to be able to quickly find suppliers. We can locate those suppliers that are top performers or bottom performers driven by that rating methodology. We also are going to be able to quickly spot risk suppliers. And of course, this is going to be suppliers that we might not want to engage with. So it's going to help us to be able to quickly root out who are the suppliers that we want to keep working with and who maybe has lost their ticket to trade. These are driven, of course, by predefined parameters. So you can predefine elements within your onboarding or risk or self-assessments, audits, as well as then performance evaluations that can drive flagging methodology, as well as then the response values from the suppliers are driving different ratings. So your guys can be able to quickly find, again, suppliers in different segments based upon who you want to engage with. To jump into a supplier scorecard, we just wanted to show off this interface. Of course, the supplier ratings gives you a backbone to be able to better communicate with your supplier about the different KPIs areas. The overall global rating can be seen up here, which is this 80% we see here, but you can break down the different rating areas as you would like to dive into those individual areas and better understand key KPIs that you want to keep a track of. You can also be able to see, value progression over time. Is a supplier getting better? Are they getting worse in these different areas, which we're gauging KPIs? To be able to follow up on engagement or just leave notes for yourself or others, you can be able to, of course, take notes in the scorecard. This is for internal communication. But if you want to, you can also be able to collaborate outbound with suppliers to issue actions, whatever those might be. If it's just, sharing meeting notes, or if it's, some type of corrective action or like, you can toggle to these things directly here. You can start new actions from here. You can also, of course, jump into an ongoing action directly from this view as you would like to as well. The other thing that's found here is, of course, documents. So say that's, meeting notes have been shared with you, or different types of certifications or contracts. Those will all be then found directly here within the supplier scorecard, so you can quickly locate that documentation as you need to in that case. There's quite a bit of other elements to the solution on this scorecard, such as, financial credit ratings, the ability to be able to update data properties, media insights, sanctions and PEP information, the ability to dive into performance and risk in various aspects. But we want to stay on the topic of engagement. One of those things, of course, would maybe be that you want to, in fact, share with a supplier their results. So, for example, maybe I want to actually share what are the different types of, documents we have on file for you as a supplier. Maybe only the compliance documentation. Also, then, how are you doing in these different areas? Or do we want to show you the view that you're looking at of your history over time? We can utilize then these different scorecard views to also engage with the supplier and make sure that they understand the importance of the different types of assessments and different types of activities that we're asking them to be able to complete as well. Jumping over to the assessments tab here, this is one of the big sections in where we're able to drive supplier engagement, mainly doing so within the Insight module. The Insight module is utilized for onboarding and self-assessment. And here, then you're able to quickly go over to some of your drafted templates that you might have here. The templates can be drafted very generically or very specific to types of suppliers, again, to keep that relativity to the supplier, to make sure that you're giving them relevant KPIs, crucial for engagement. Just to jump into a draft here, you're going to be able to directly build these up as you need to. So you guys can be able to determine what is the scope and naming this internally for other users to be able to know what this is all about. choosing the different areas in which you want the supplier to assess themselves, and you want to be able to rate them based upon up to 14 different areas. You don't need to choose them all. You can also be able to do data checks, right, for supplier information management. So, for example, say that we want to make sure that we get the payment details and payment terms on file for all of our suppliers. Well, then we can be able to directly drag in this data. So the supplier, if they have data on file, will be able to check off that it's correct, update it, or if they don't have data on file, they'll be able to provide us back with the data property that we need. Within then the contents area, you can be able to build a assessment heading, which is an introduction. This is a content that is going to be a landing page the supplier will be able to see. As you see, you can choose more engaging copy within your headings, right? Throwing around the importance of what it is that's happening here. It's an initiative that they're taking part of. Throwing around our logo, as we see here, so that the supplier knows who it's coming from, and it's, you know, really also then engaging copy within the actual text so that they also know that what they're doing is in fact important. Again, relativity. We can't preach this enough within, especially when you're doing risk assessment of the suppliers, to make sure that they aren't answering on things that they shouldn't need to answer on. So for example, the relativity to be able to do things like ask relational questions, right? So for example, if a supplier has an ISO 9001 certification, then they can answer yes. They can also then upload that certificate and add an expiry date, which then will be typified and then reposited in that scorecard, as we saw. But if they say no, well, then maybe you will add a relationship to this particular question, driving then that the attribute that they said no, they don't have a certificate. If the answer to that is no, then they will then get a follow-up question or multiple follow-up questions, as we see that these particular questions are all tagged relationally to the ISO 9001 certificate attribute in that case. So just a simple way for you guys to make sure that you're asking the right questions to the right suppliers and not doing overkill where you shouldn't be. Thanking them, of course, for their participation is important, but also ensuring that your copy within your outreach is important, right? Branding that copy so that they know that it's coming from you. Making sure that you utilize subject lines that are engaging, as we talked about before, right? So things like for your attention, action verbs like complete, for example, right? In your follow-ups and your final calls, make sure that they know that this is a reminder. You know, ask them things like please respond, or say things like last call to respond, right? Utilizing action verbs and throwing around the importance is really good for you guys to be able to ensure that you're going to get better engagement from the supplier base. And this is not just within risk assessment, right? It's in general when you're contacting suppliers. Take these tips with you and you can implement them in various aspects. When it comes to the actual, you know, build up of the outreach. So for example, we're able to see here, we've been able to put in, right, the supplier contact person placeholder, as well as then the supplier name, as well as then an internal contact person's name. These are placeholders then so that we can send these out to hundreds, if not thousands of suppliers at once, and it will personalize this particular email as well. So the supplier is going to go, wow, this company really cares about me, when in reality, you can send this out to all of your suppliers at once. What you can be able to do here is see a view as well of what the supplier is going to see, right? And I mean, this is important that you guys can be able to understand what is that experience going to be for that supplier? What is it going to look like when they respond back in these different areas? You can test out that conditional logic, right, related to the different questions, as well as then also see how the status bar is going to guide them along the way, seeing how they can push along to the different sections when they need documentation or don't. They're going to be shown that, so forth and so on. So you guys can be able to get a taste for what their experience is going to be as well as a supplier. The outreach also, to make sure that you're engaging with engaged suppliers. I mean, this is important. Within your campaigns, you can be able to start outreach as you would like to. So a campaign is a fancy way for saying a send out, right? So we could be able to say, we want to send out to a supplier onboarding of some sort to active suppliers. We don't want to send to inactive suppliers. Why? Well, because of course, they're not going to be as engaged. So we've typified and have that as a data property and a filter. So we can choose then a template that we've toggled on and published. We can choose a list of suppliers. We can add then to scope or approved suppliers, yes, please, as well as then our active suppliers, yes, please. So then we're getting a smaller and smaller list every time we filter. So we can select those filtered suppliers, adding those 11 to scope, then being able to schedule out these emails as we've built up in that case, making sure that the supplier is going to engage, adding attachments in the same way that you would if you were sending any other email so that they can be able to read across policies or alike, and then you can send those off. Again, upping your engagement here, you're going to be able to have complete overview of who's responding, who isn't, have they gotten back on the response, have they clicked on it, have they opened it, has these been delivered or not, have they bounced. So it's going to make sure that you guys can stay on top of any type of activities that the supplier themselves say that they're doing or not. In the reports, you're going to be able to quickly get back insights of, who's been flagged, who hasn't, based upon their responses. And of course, then you can dive into these individual reports. You can also do things like exporting them to share them with the supplier, or just sharing links, which are smart links with the supplier. One of the places you might do that, right, is like in the action space. So for example, here I could be able to have a portal back and forth, communication simply, so I can be able to communicate with the supplier. It's a chat bubble, right? We can be able to directly communicate, and I can issue my corrective actions, whatever they might be, or simple comms. Both parties can be able to upload documents, right? Those things will be typified and then marked in the supplier scorecard. Everybody's going to also see a history. So there's transparency here between both parties, and the supplier themselves can also be able to push forward the process. So it pings us as the person responsible pending our approval. Also, of course, going to up the engagement is that you guys are getting probed with notifications when things are happening. They're getting probed with notifications when things are happening. So everybody's going to be more active and proactive when you have momentum within the relationship, and when you guys need to communicate, you're going to be able to know that you need to get in touch with each other as well. The last tab, of course, is then analytics, right? So we can start getting a bit smarter about some of these different aspects related to the supplier relationship, to supplier performance, to supplier engagement and alike, right? For example, we could be able to pull up different levels of, engaged suppliers. So how many suppliers have been subject, for example, to self-assessments, or how many suppliers have out activities that are corrective actions and alike, right? There's different types of dashboarding capabilities, everything from these kind of fixed widgets to be able to give you guys overviews of different suppliers in different areas, rating history, top and bottom performers, so we could be able to quickly find those suppliers, for example, with the highest ability and capacity for innovation. We can pull those forward. So we do start enabling innovation with those suppliers. Things as well like compliance tracking, right? So we can stay on top of suppliers that have or have not shared documentation with us when auditing comes around, and we need to be able to pull forward this information to make sure that the suppliers are in fact living up to what it is that we've contracted and they said that they would engage with in that way. Everything down to like pivot tables to be able to utilize larger sets of data as you need to visualize whatever that might be. In that case, whether it's different rating profiles, payment terms, groupings and categories and alike. So that was a quick overview of the solution and a demonstration of how SRM technology can better boost your overall supplier engagement, but also your experience as a user and a buyer. We're going to pause here as we've come up to the end of the day's session timeline that we had. We do have 3 to 5 minutes though left. If there are any questions, please take the time to just quickly write those down in the chat bubble and we'll get around to them as they're asked. I see that there is already a question here by Joanna. You will be getting the recording of this webinar sometime tomorrow. So that will be distributed to both attendees that were able to attend today as well as those that were not in that case. There is actually one last poll as well. For those that have sat through the full session today, thank you so much for your participation. We would love to know what type of content do you guys want to see if we were going to host a webinar in the future? What would be a topic that you think would be interesting for us to host a webinar about? It'd be great to know if you have an idea, a topic, something that you think would be interesting to dive deeper into, then let us know in the poll right now. It's a free open form poll, and we can of course see what we can do with that content as well. And again, if there's any questions, please feel free to write them into the chat bubble now, and we'll get around to those as they roll in.